Okay, here we go. How's it going, folks? Chuck Holton here. Thank you for watching the Hot Zone. It is going to be an interesting one today. We're going to talk a lot about the upcoming war with Hezbollah and is it inevitable? Some people are saying that it is absolutely inevitable, that it is going to happen. And we're going to talk about if it happens, when that might be, and we're going to talk about what it might look like if the war actually happens, if Israel and Hezbollah go to war. Now, why is it inevitable? Well, the article, which I will post in the chat if you want to go and take a look at it, we'll put that over here. The article's from Real Clear Politics, and it's by Gadi Taub, who I'm assuming is Israeli. And Gadi Taub is saying that this war is inevitable, although Gadi doesn't say exactly when it might happen. I'll just caveat all of this. Let's just preface all this by explaining what's going on in the North right now. What we're seeing in the North is a continued ramping up of the fighting back and forth between Israel and Hezbollah. Hezbollah, as you know, controls the southern third or so of Lebanon, and they claim to have something like 30,000 active duty fighters and maybe another 60,000 or so reserve fighters. If they did go to war, those numbers could likely go up quite a bit because they're going to be recruiting more people from the local populace, whether or not they want to be recruited, and they're going to get help from Islamic jihadi fighters coming from around the world, from as far away as Chechnya, Dagestan. They would come from Syria. They would come from Iraq, perhaps even Iran. And some of them might be just guys that are ad hoc deciding to join and fight against Israel, and some might be organized military units that are being sent by their home countries. So Hezbollah, as you probably know, is one of the largest and most powerful non-state military actors on planet Earth. Not only do they have something like 100,000 total fighters, possibly more. They claim to have more at times. But what really makes them dangerous is the fact that they have something like 150,000 rockets, missiles, and an unknown number of drones, all aimed at Israel. The reason that's a bad thing is because the Iron Dome system cannot handle that many. It's not out of the realm of possibility that Hezbollah could fire off 3,000 or 4,000 missiles at once aimed at Israel. And, you know, if you look at the different weapon systems that Israel has to shoot down those rockets and missiles, they have the Iron Dome system, which each cassette carries 60 rockets, I think. Now, that might sound like a lot unless you're talking about thousands of missiles coming at you. They have the Arrow system, which I think only has like maybe 12 rockets or 12 shots in each cassette that before they have to reload. The Patriot missile batteries, I think, only have 6. They have David's Sling, which also has, you know, a fairly low number. And so, and they don't have hundreds and hundreds of these Iron Dome rocket systems to shoot these things down. They have, I don't know, maybe a dozen, 10 or a dozen, something like that. That's all. If you add up all of the anti-rocket, anti-missile systems that Israel has so far, thank you, MM, you're talking about maybe 40, 50, something like that, spread out around Israel. So they also can shoot down rockets and missiles with their aircraft, and they've got a couple of hundred of those, but they certainly couldn't have all of them in the air at once, and they wouldn't put all of them in one area of Israel and leave the rest of Israel undefended. They've made that mistake before, and they're not going to do that again. Reloading those things, Stephen, I think takes about half an hour. If I could be mistaken on that, but that's my understanding. Something like about a half an hour. So what Hezbollah could theoretically do is fire the first volley of so many rockets and missiles into Israel that Israel can't shoot them all down, but they're going to use up almost all of their anti-missile systems trying to shoot them down. And then very quickly after that, fire another salvo of missiles and rockets aimed at the actual sites where those anti-missile systems are set up. And then what you're talking about is Israel is undefended. They would have very, very few assets left in order to protect themselves. Their entire defensive strategy is built around the concept of using the Iron Dome system. Okay, Welsh Hunter says they can be loaded in 5 minutes. I'm not sure about that. Some of them perhaps, but I don't think all of them can be reloaded that fast. Even still, there could theoretically be too many rockets and missiles fired at Israel for that to matter. Because all they need to do is start taking out those rocket and missile sites, and then Israel's capability goes down very quickly. They could also hit Israeli military bases. They just released a second video that was shot from a drone with very high quality video of sensitive sites across northern Israel. The first one they did showed sites in Haifa. This one, I believe, showed sites in northern Galilee. Not very exciting to think that they have drones that can fly that far into Israel and record sensitive sites around there and give them targeting information that they can use to try to take out Israeli defensive capabilities. So that's just the rockets and missiles. Believe it or not, Hezbollah actually has tanks, and they have armored personnel carriers. Now, those are, I believe, virtually all stored right now in Syria, and they probably would not be a part of a first wave attack against Israel. But they would be no match, make no mistake, they'd be no match for Israeli tanks and artillery and drones and things like that. But they do have them. If Israel is going to go to war with Hezbollah, it's going to happen inside Lebanon. It's not going to happen inside Israel for the most part. Now, it is possible that Hezbollah could see it coming and decide, look, this is a foregone conclusion. This war is going to happen, and it's going to happen very soon. And so either we use these assets against Israel now, or we lose them in the first wave of attacks from Israel. So we might as well try to, attack, do a preemptive strike against Israel and pull a October 7th and cross the border into Israel and try to kill people. It's more difficult than October 7th because, thank you, Vicky, that's very kind of you, because there are essentially no Israelis left within 5 kilometers of the border. But you can cover 5 kilometers pretty fast. It just take a couple of minutes driving on roads. Now, they do have military up there. The Israelis have been stacking their military up on the northern border in anticipation of the command to go in. So this guy on Real Clear Politics, Gadi Taub, says, since October 7th, the Biden administration has been preoccupied above all with preventing the Gaza war from spreading to the north and escalating into a no-holds-barred war with Hezbollah. There's ample reason for concern. A full-fledged war between Israel and Iran's largest proxy could bring the administration's whole Middle East policy tumbling down, since it will force the White House to make a public choice. It'll have to abandon its quest for accommodation with Iran and take a clear pro-Israeli stand. Thank you, Kimball. Very kind of you. And that's true. I don't think the United States under Joe Biden could get away with refusing to support Israel if they got into a full-fledged war with Hezbollah. But somebody said you should watch CBN. Michael Darwin says you should watch CBN. I do watch CBN. I'm on CBN. I make TV for CBN. This is going to lead into what I'm going to talk about a little bit later, which is when I think a war like this might happen. And what that has to do. Because what's going to decide when this war takes place probably has more to do with politics than it has to do with kinetic realities on the ground. So we'll talk about that more toward the end. He goes on to say, but preventing a war with Israel and Hezbollah will prove harder than the administration realizes. Many tens of thousands, we've talked about this many times, tens of thousands of Israelis, something like 60 to 80,000 Israelis are still evacuated from their homes in the north. Thank you, Aries 51. That's nice of you. I went to Kiryat Shimona. This is a couple weeks ago on my last few days in Israel, on my last trip. And it's a ghost town. There's almost no one there. It was a town of 20, 25,000 people. And it's empty. Because they are so close. They're just a couple of kilometers, about a mile from the border with Hezbollah. And there's almost no warning when the rockets and missiles come in. Very often you'll hear the explosion of the rocket or the mortar or whatever, and then you'll hear the siren go off. So that's not a place where people are going to want to take their kids to go to school. And so those people have been stuck living in hotels for 9 months. And just imagine what that must be like. Imagine how hard it would be for you and, say, your 3 kids to live in a hotel room, one hotel room, away from your job, away from their friends, away from their social life, away from your church or your synagogue, for 9 months. Those guys, they sit around at the hotels where they're stuck. They get a stipend from the government, but it's not much of one. And it's not a long-term strategy. They're not going to be able to continue living that way. So the political establishment in Israel is being pressured increasingly by their own populace to get this problem solved so that they can go back to their lives. Many of those people, I believe, who were pushed out of their homes in the north have already made plans not to go back ever. They're going to just move somewhere else because They don't believe that the government will be able to make them safe when it comes to getting rid of the threat from Hezbollah. I mean, think about how much harder it will be in Lebanon than it is in Gaza. The Israelis took something like nearly 100,000 troops into Gaza. Gaza being an area the size of Philadelphia, surrounded on two sides by Israel and one side by the Mediterranean Sea. And they have one little southern border with Egypt, and Egypt has proven not to want to be very helpful to the Gazans as far as letting them get out of there or letting stuff in. And so Israel had de facto control of the borders of Gaza to begin with. They're talking about an area that is something like 1/16 the size of the southern part of Lebanon, if that. And they have been at it for almost 9 months. And they still have not defeated Hamas. They may never be able to defeat Hamas. If there's anything that we've learned from the last few wars that the United States has fought, it's that insurgencies, fighting against radical ideologies is a very difficult thing to do. We can fight them, but you can't really kill your way out of them, because as you kill the bad guys, you create more bad guys. You create more people who are angry at you for killing their family and friends and want to join up. So it's very hard to kill your way out of something like that. And so not only has Israel failed so far to destroy Hamas, now they've gone a long way to destroying their military capability. They've gone a long way to destroying their ability to govern, but they have not destroyed Hamas. And Hamas will, if they stop right now, Hamas will likely be able to just regrow over time and eventually pose a threat to Israel once again. Israel has had this strategy they call mowing the grass, which is just, we're going to go in there whenever they stick their heads up and we're going to cut them down and then just wait for the next time they do that. This goes along with the strategy that I've talked about, that, when you are a threat to us, we will come in there and we will reboot your country. My strategy is a little bit harsher than mowing the grass, because mowing the grass meant when we perceive a threat from Hamas in Gaza, we will drop a bomb on some of their leadership. I'm talking about going whole hog like they're doing now and saying, no, we're not going to just assassinate a few of your leaders. We are going to come in and absolutely wipe the floor in Gaza, tear down 20% of your housing in the process, destroy anything that could possibly be any kind of military target or military facility. Tunnels, UNRWA schools, mosques, we don't care. We're going to destroy everything that could possibly be used to threaten us, and then we're going to leave. And we're going to let you have it back. Now, a lot of people have taken issue with that because there's more to it than that when it comes to Gaza, because Gaza is Israel. And there are many Israelis who believe that Israelis should have never left there in the first place in 2005. But suffice it to say that the Israelis have been fighting in Gaza for 9 months and they're still getting people shooting back at them. So they haven't killed everybody who needs killed yet. So imagine taking that on a much larger scale into Lebanon, a country that is not surrounded that cannot easily be cut off, that can very easily be resupplied with men, materiel, equipment from Syria, Iraq, Iran. They're not going to be able to close those borders. And you're talking about a much different animal. So while this writer, Gadi Taub, is making the case that the Israelis are not going to settle for anything less than outright war with Lebanon in order to make the northern part of the country safe. That is, the question is not, will Israel have to go to war with Lebanon? The likely answer to that question is absolutely, it is inevitable that they will have to go to war at some point. Because no country can handle having, a good percentage of their, we're talking about hundreds of square miles of their sovereign territory denied to them because of the threat from their neighbor. That's a non-starter. But the bigger question is not if the war will happen. It very likely is going to happen at some point. The bigger question is when, and what do the conditions need to be before Israel will be ready to go hard against Hezbollah. Now, they've been bombing Hezbollah back. Hezbollah has been trying to kill Israelis. Israelis have been killing them back since the beginning of the war. For its part, the commander of Hezbollah, Abdel Nasser, has been very clear that he does not desire war with Israel at this point, that they are simply standing up for their brothers in Gaza, and that as soon as Israel declares a ceasefire in Gaza, that they will stop firing missiles at Israel from the north. But we're at a point where that's really not good enough now. That's not good enough because they will still have the ability to fire missiles whenever they want to. And the people of Israel are done with that. They see this as never again is right now. So the people of Israel are pretty much demanding that the war happen. My assertion here is going to be that Israel needs to go to war with Hezbollah, barring some sort of miraculous diplomatic coup that makes it unnecessary, but that's not likely. However, I don't think Israel is ready yet for a war in the north. Now, look, Hezbollah is going to lose when the war comes. They can't win the war. Even if they get help from Iran, even if they get help from Hashishabi in Iraq and Syria, they can't win. They're not going to win. Israel is not going to lose this war. But it's going to be much more costly than any war Israel has ever faced. Israel right now, in normal times, they have 130,000 or so active duty soldiers at any given time. Right now, Israel has closer to 500,000 that are on duty. But they can't keep them there for long. They're not going to be able to keep 500,000 of their citizens on active duty for the indefinite future. It's just too hard on their economy to do that. So for that reason, it's one of these things where either Israel's going to have to go soon, like their own economy is putting pressure on them to go soon, sooner rather than later. The people of Israel are putting pressure on Israel to go sooner rather than later. The international community, for its part, is definitely on the side of later rather than sooner. They want Israel to hold off, if possible forever, on this war, but especially until after the election here in the United States in November. Hezbollah probably does not want a war at all because it's going to be very costly for them as well, not just in the personnel sense. They're going to lose a lot of people, but they're also going to lose a large portion of their arsenal, and they're going to lose a lot of political clout in their own country. They're already losing that from what they've been doing so far. This is not a popular conflict to most people in Lebanon. Think about that. It's far different from what's happening in Gaza, where most people in Gaza likely support Hamas and what they've done and are doing to Israel. But in Lebanon, it's the opposite. The vast majority of Lebanese people say, we've got enough problems on our hands right now. We can't afford to have a war with Israel, even if we wanted to do so. And so they're not happy about Hezbollah stoking the fires of the political tensions with Israel right now. So I would say that if you had to guess, Hezbollah is probably on the later rather than sooner course. Hezbollah would rather that Israel just declare a ceasefire in Gaza and give Hezbollah an off-ramp to say, okay, there. We stood up for our brothers in Gaza, and now we're done, and we're going to step back. But the pressure on Israel to go to war with Hezbollah sooner is mounting. And it's mounting to the point where many experts are saying that the war could literally start within days, if not days, weeks. Now, in my experience, if you've watched any of my videos, you know that I'm not one for making predictions about the future because I don't think it's biblical, for one thing. And I've done this for so long that I've just realized you'll almost always be wrong because there are 1,000 things that can happen tomorrow that none of us can plan for. And so there's no sense in trying to make precise predictions about when it's going to happen, what's going to happen in the future. But as my friend Michael Yon likes to say, if you look around yourself and you find yourself in a forest, and the forest is exceedingly dry, all it takes is one spark to set the whole forest on fire. And the conditions are right for a fire, and there are lots of things around that could easily cause a spark. And so it doesn't really matter where the spark comes from, but as soon as it happens, the whole thing goes up. Now, one other reason why the United States doesn't want this war to happen is because they are pretty concerned, and I would say rightly so, that this would easily escalate into a regional or even supra-regional war, even to the point where it could be between the United States and Russia. So, a lot of people have asked me about the Ezekiel 38 and 39 war. If you're not familiar with that, the war that is talked about in Ezekiel 38 and 39 is prophesied. It's a conflict that's prophesied in the Bible. And it comes from Ezekiel's vision of a future invasion of Israel by a coalition of nations. The prophecy mentions Gog and Magog, Gog of the land of Magog, which many people believe to be Russia, as the leader of that coalition. Other nations that are mentioned include modern Iran, Persia, Ethiopia, Libya, and other countries, Gomer and Beth Togarmah. The scenario, according to the prophecy, is that these nations will invade Israel in the latter days, but will be defeated by divine intervention. Their thing is, there are a lot of things in the timing that have to come true according to the Bible before this war can take place. And depending on your eschatology, whether you're premillennial, postmillennial, amillennial, you could have a vastly different sort of ideas about what the Bible means when these prophecies are made in Ezekiel. So some of the prophecies have already been fulfilled in that they talk about the return of the Jewish people to their homeland, the creation of the state of Israel, prosperity and security for Israel, the formation of a coalition against Israel, this axis of resistance that's been talked about. The rebuilding of the temple, though, is one that has not happened. And some interpretations say that the rebuilding of the temple has to happen before this war. Even on top of that, the rise of the Antichrist. Some people say that's got to happen before this war can happen. So I think we could venture to say that this conflict that we see right now is not in and of itself the Ezekiel 38 and 39 war, but it certainly shows us all the puzzle pieces coming together to create the conditions for the Ezekiel 38 and 39 war at some point in the perhaps not so distant future. But will Israel pull the trigger on this? Well, first of all, let's talk about what it would look like if they did. Like I said, it's very likely that this war would end up taking place in southern Lebanon, south of the Litani River. This is a wide area. I've been up there. I've been to that area a couple times. And there are some good-sized cities in there, lots of villages and towns, and lots of open area in there. It's very rocky in some areas, very mountainous. So that kind of topography would make the war more difficult. You also have to keep in mind that it's undoubtable that Hezbollah has been planning for this war to take place for likely decades, preparing, digging tunnels, digging fighting positions, stockpiling weapons. And so we saw the same thing in Gaza as far as Hamas having been prepared for this war. But the terrain is much worse. Not only is there a lot of urban terrain that, for example, Sidon, where Israel would have to fight, and that in and of itself is very, very bad. But there's a lot of mountainous terrain. There's a lot of open, farmland and woods and things like that that would make it very, very difficult for Israel to defeat what would almost immediately become an insurgency. It would be a hybrid of a conventional war, force on force, an insurgency, which is where one side is much weaker but also has the ability to blend into the local population, to sneak around and just strike wherever the enemy is weak. Insurgencies, they say, are usually lost by the side that has helicopters. That would be Israel. And an asymmetric war from Hezbollah and its allies. Asymmetric war being cyber, information war, dirty pool, let's put it that way. Lots of things that they could do other than fighting kinetically with bombs and bullets, although they have lots of those. So, if this is the case, it's going to be a very long, very costly conflict, both for Israel and for Lebanon. Now, in addition to the weapons that Hezbollah brings to the table in this war, they've got hundreds of technicals. Those are essentially a pickup truck with a big machine gun in the back. They've got armored personnel carriers, as I mentioned. They even have a few tanks, which I think they bought from Syria. They're old, but tanks are tanks, tanks for nothing. And Israel has a lot more tanks, has a lot more trucks, armored personnel carriers, and they have a lot of things that Hezbollah does not have. Air superiority being one of them. Hezbollah does not have an air force. They have some drones, but that's it. Where Israel they have a couple hundred F-15s, F-16s. They've got like 40, I think, F-35s. They've got missiles and rockets and bombs, and they get lots of help in terms of weaponry from the United States and Germany, their two biggest allies. They've also been getting stuff from the UK. They're not getting anything anymore from like France and Spain and countries like that, because those have gone pretty far hard left and are actually supporting the Palestinian cause at this point. But they do have allies who are providing them with weaponry. And the United States is, even though they've been sort of tacitly throwing Israel under the bus in this war since October, they've been saying that they support Israel while they don't actually support Israel in a lot of ways. In the case of a full-scale war, I think the balance of support between, again, this goes down to politics, the wealthy, liberal American Jews and the poor, liberal, progressive, communist, Antifa, living in their mom's basement, green hair hippies on college campuses. Well, the Biden administration is going to go with the one that gives them the most money. And that is by far liberal Jews in America. So now you could say that the most likely thing, I think, at this point, is that if the war is going to start this year, that it will likely, I believe, it will be more likely that that a full-scale war with Hezbollah will start after the Israelis see who won the election in November. Because when it comes down to it, they know that they would get more help from a Trump administration than they would from an administration under Joe Biden. And the Biden administration would actually, I believe, be much more likely to send lots and lots of military help, even to the point of sending troops, at least in the form of Air Force fighter jets and things like that, to help Israel, if the election were over and Biden had won again. You know, once Biden, God forbid, gets reelected, then Biden is much more free to sort of diss the left-wing, happy, naked, pagan dancing, frog-licking, tree-hugging, dirt-worshipping hippies on college campuses who are going to get out the vote, and spend more time pandering to the liberal Jews who will actually give him money. Trump, for his part, I think showed in his first term that he was much more likely to fully support Israel in every way, including militarily. And so either way, no matter who wins the U.S. presidential election in November, I think Israel is much more likely to get the assistance that it will need for the war with Hezbollah after November. If they wait until then they also have more time to stockpile weapons and ammunition and perhaps get a few more anti-missile systems put in place. So it seems to me that it's just going to be much more likely that Israel will wait, will hold off, perhaps until springtime. You know, starting a war in northern Israel in the middle of winter would be a whole lot of no fun for Israel. It would make it much more difficult for their tanks, which are super heavy. Israeli tanks are some of the heaviest tanks in the world, more than 70 tons. And the terrain up there, if you got snow and ice and everything, is just going to be really bad. So what some of the people I've spoken to in northern Israel lately believe is that Israel is looking for a short to medium term solution that can placate their electorate for the short term and get people to return back to their homes in the north to some extent. They're looking for some sort of perhaps diplomatic off-ramp, you know, or a limited military solution that will slow things down a little bit and will make it less likely that Hezbollah will continue to throw hundreds of missiles and rockets at northern Israel. Now, for its part, more time also gives Hezbollah more time to prepare. And believe me, they are doing everything they can to prepare. We know that because Israel is regularly killing IRGC commanders inside Lebanon now. They just did today. They killed another IRGC commander today inside, or it could have been yesterday, inside Lebanon on his way to Damascus. And that IRGC commander was being accompanied by Hassan Nasrallah's #1 bodyguard, who was also killed in the strike. I think that it's likely we could see another uptick in the next 48 hours of rockets and missiles coming out of southern Lebanon at Israel in retaliation for that strike, and perhaps even another strike from Iran directly on Israel because of the IRGC commander that they just killed inside Lebanon. Don't know. But without a doubt, Iran is sending weapons and trainers to Hezbollah. Hezbollah has been sending their weapons and trainers, I'm sorry, not their weapons, has been sending their cadre, their soldiers, into Syria for years to fight in Syria against ISIS, against the Kurds, even against America, in order to get combat experience. So it's likely that Hezbollah's troops will be much better trained than the troops that Israel has been fighting so far in Gaza. They've got a lot more money for training. They actually have a lot more in terms of like uniformed full-time troops that the guys in Gaza didn't have. So it will be a very hard fight. And my assertion is that Israel has, they have to spend more time preparing. They are not prepared to do this. Think about it. Israel has been responding to October 7th for the last 9 months. And I'm not saying they can't do two things at once. I'm not saying they couldn't be also making plans for a fight in the north. They obviously have been doing that. They obviously have been training their troops up to fight in the north. But they need more time. And they need more equipment. They need more assistance. But most importantly, they need to figure out who their friends are and how much support they can count on from the United States. And like I said, they really won't know the answer to that question until after the November elections. So if I had to guess, if you put a gun to my head, I would say that we will continue to see ping pong with missiles between Israel and Hezbollah. They will shoot at each other from across the border between now and November. And after that, at some point after that, we will see the next great war. And this will likely be the largest war Israel has ever fought. When you look at it in those terms, when you look at what this war will look like on the ground, again, Hezbollah, much stronger, much better trained, much better equipped, highly motivated. The only thing Hezbollah will not have that Hamas had is the ability to cry that they're the victim, the ability to beg for the world's support by saying, oh, we're being victimized by Israel. Because nobody could say that southern Lebanon is an open-air prison camp, like they said about Gaza, which was untrue, but that's what they said in the news. Nobody could say that Hezbollah didn't have any other option. And that has been the strongest weapon that Hamas has been able to wield so far in this war. And not being able to do that, that doesn't mean that the media is going to go all in for Israel. Of course not. They're going to try to find ways to excoriate and crucify Israel for attacking Lebanon. The Lebanese government will very likely claim victim status. They'll pull the victim card. oh, look, the Lebanese military has no beef with Israel. We're not fighting Israel. Why is Israel attacking our country? But everybody can see that the Lebanese government is being victimized by Hezbollah like Israel is. Hezbollah is victimizing, they're a parasite in Lebanon. One of the things that worries me is that the Lebanese military is less well equipped than Hezbollah. And so Hezbollah could very well actually go and confiscate military hardware from the Lebanese military. They could go take military, they could take tanks and trucks and, other things from the Lebanese military if they felt like they needed it. And even though Israel has been bombing targets inside Syria, as the Iranians have been trying to create this land bridge where they can move supplies into Lebanon for Hezbollah, and Israel has been striking them wherever they find them to put a stop to that, they're not going to be able to stop all of it. And so this next war with Hezbollah, when it starts, will very likely go on for years. It'll look more like a war between the war that we see between Ukraine and Russia, with Hezbollah playing the part of Russia. Hezbollah has been encouraged and supported by Russia up to this point. The Russian president has met with the leaders of Hezbollah in Moscow. So this is where that gets to be very dangerous, because, Israel will win a war against Hezbollah. No question about that. Hezbollah has maybe 100,000 troops. Israel can pull up 500,000, much better trained, much better equipped in terms of Air Force, Navy, tanks, everything like that. So if it's just between Hezbollah and Israel, Israel wins every time. No question. But if you add up all the fighters in Hezbollah, the Syrian Hashishabi, the Iraqi Hashishabi, these are the Iranian-backed militias there, and the Iranian military, you're talking about over 1 million troops, double the number that Israel has in the field right now. They're talking about 1 million troops. Now, 3/4 of that is Iran in and of itself, and Iran would have a very hard time projecting its military all the way into Israel. Iran does not have an expeditionary force, and so their military is going to have a really hard time moving 600,000 people or 700,000 people from Iran all the way into Israel to attack Israel. It's not going to happen. But they do have lots of missiles and drones and things like that, and so they can certainly bring something to the fight. But more likely is that if they get involved, then the United States has to get involved. Saudi Arabia gets involved. Maybe even Jordan gets involved on the side of Israel. Maybe at that point, Syria gets involved on the side of Iran and Hezbollah. Then what does Turkey do? That's a really good question. Turkey supports Hezbollah politically, but they're a NATO ally. And what you're probably not going to see is Turkey going to war against another NATO ally. They might just try to stay above the fray, at least unless it got really bad. The most worrying aspect would be if Russia decided to get involved. Now, I don't think that Russia has the bandwidth to get involved, really. They have sent trainers to Hezbollah, and that's probably the furthest they could go, because they are losing so many men in Ukraine. that we've seen them. I've been there, in Armenia, where they're supposed to have 8,000 peacekeepers, and they've been pulling them all out. They've pulled out almost all their troops from Armenia because they just need them in Ukraine. They've been trying to recruit prisoners. They've actually been extending citizenship and residency to foreign people from Pakistan and from India and from Africa and places like that. And what they don't tell them is that if you decide you're going to take our generous offer of citizenship in Russia, you're going to go fight in the military. And so these people come and immediately get sent off to the front. That is not a picture of a country that has a lot of men to spare in another war somewhere else. But that doesn't mean, again, that Russia could not get involved directly with a few jet fighters or something like that. I just don't think that's super likely, but that's a big worry, because if they got anybody involved and you end up with a force on force between the United States and Russia, or Israel and Russia, things get very bad very quick. So I think we need to continue to pray for Israel. We need to keep our eyes on this conflict. Be praying against the plans of evil men. That's what I always pray. I don't need to know who's on the right side. I just need to know that God knows the heart. And so if God would thwart the plans of evil men, then the problem won't last. It won't linger. Okay, so let me just run through real quick and see if we got a few questions here. It looks like Kana and Jimmy, the Jew, are duking it out on there. Can you guys take that somewhere else? I'm happy to have both of you here, but the point of you being here is not so that you can come and toss napalm at each other. Let's see, Israel making their own. Okay, Chuck Freeman has a question. Is Israel making their own 5.56 millimeter ammo and other small arms ammunition, and what other munitions do they manufacture? They are ramping up their munitions capability, their ability to make their own weapons. So that sort of that they have more now than they did at the beginning of the war. And I've talked to a couple people who are planning to start making ammunition and weapons inside Israel to give them a little more freedom from having to rely on the United States and others to give them the weapons and ammo that they need. They're not running out of ammunition right now. What about weapons and ammunition storage at Beirut Airport? There was a rumor going around that was happening, but at least from what I read, that was just a rumor, and there wasn't any basis to it. That they did not have a large ammo. There's a big worry, of course. A lot of people in Beirut are very worried about large amounts of explosives being stored anywhere inside Beirut after that absolutely apocalyptic explosion they had a couple of years ago, where a bunch of fertilizer went up right next to Beirut Airport and all but flattened a good portion of the city. I mean, if you go back and you look at the videos of that explosion, it's just astounding. It's like I've never seen, other than a nuclear bomb, I've never seen an explosion like that before. It was absolutely enormous. And so the people in Beirut are probably like, every time there's anything that might explode. They probably don't even like helium balloons at this point. Okay, so let's go back. I don't see Hezbollah backing down. This is the thing, we really need an off-ramp that allows both countries to sort of save face and take take a breath here, take a step back. Wow. I learn a lot reading through these comments. You get these people on here that are like an expert in one very specific thing, like Ottoman history or something, and they start putting stuff on the chat, and you're like, okay, I want to stop talking now and just read what this guy has to say. And a lot of times you find out, oh, he just thinks he knows what he's talking about. He doesn't actually know, but sometimes they do. Question, did yesterday's report show the economy is 1 point away from a new Great Depression? Are you talking about the U.S. economy? I know it was worse than expected. I've done, this is LMG Philanthropy asking, look, I've done podcasts about the U.S. economy in the recent past. You can go back and look at some of those. What I do is I kind of go through how you're being lied to about the economy. They have dramatically changed how they measure things like inflation and unemployment in the last 30 or 40 years, to the point where you can't, it's apples and oranges at this point. And if you went back and took the measurement standards that they used back in the 1980s and measured unemployment and inflation and things like that by those old standards, by those old measurement standards, you'd see the real state of the economy has not gotten better in the last 3 years. But I don't think you even need to do that. Just talk to anybody who lives in the United States and ask them if they're better off than they were 4 years ago. I don't know very many people who are. Question, I've been watching you from Australia since October, and I've not heard you talk about prophecy very much before. Has something changed to make you think it's more biblical now? No, I don't talk a lot about prophecy because I'm a journalist and not a prophet. I'm not a theologian. I've been a Christian my whole life. I've read the Bible many times. I've read a lot about prophecy, but I'm an amateur when it comes to prophecy. And so I'm not going to speculate on those things. There are lots of YouTube channels out there with people who have made that their field of expertise. And so much of prophecy depends on your own personal worldview when it comes to your eschatology. Are you premillennial, postmillennial, amillennial? That can give you the vastly different takes on what biblical prophecy has to say. And in my experience, talking about prophecy is a great way to get people at each other's throats. Obviously, not everybody who watches my show is a Christian. We have a lot of Jews. We have a lot of people that are, nuns, who, not Catholic nuns, although we may have some of those. Nuns as in no religion. And so while I might mention it from time to time, usually in the context of answering people's questions, I don't see that as that's not my area of expertise. And so I'm going to stick to what I'm good at. If there's anything there's not much worse than having somebody hold forth on an issue about which they don't know enough to teach you anything, because then you're just likely to lead people astray. The Bible commands us to rightly divide the word of truth. And I think part of doing that is knowing enough to say that we don't know, and being humble enough to say that we don't know. As I've always said, my personal take on the end times prophecy is not that I stop reading in the book of Jude, the second to last book of the Bible, but that I take to heart the message of the book of Jude, which is to keep pulling people out of the fire until the end. Point, period, end of story. You guys can fight all you want about the book of Daniel, the book of Isaiah, about Ezekiel. You guys can go back and forth about that. Arguing about it is not going to change when it happens. The end times is going to happen perfectly on God's schedule. And our command in the meantime is to yank people out of the fire. So I'm going to focus on that. And I hope you can understand. Okay? Okay. All right. So let's back up. One Tired Mama, thank you for deleting our trolls. We appreciate you being on Troll Patrol. Troll Patrol. Say that 10 times fast. Everybody, go and hit the like button specifically to say thanks to One Tired Mama for the tireless work that she does without pay on this channel to keep the people nice in the chat. I really appreciate it when you hit the like button. It tells YouTube that more people need to see this content. I would also appreciate it if you'd subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet. If you're watching on your phone, by the way, and you're watching the chat box, you have to get rid of the chat box and swipe that out of the way in order to be able to hit the like and subscribe buttons. You won't see them if you're looking at the chat box while you're watching the video. Okay? Now, question, how can a regular Joe get disabled on a regular job and the most difficult job in the world is given to a disabled denial person? Carlos, no idea what you're talking about there, buddy. Let's see. Question, what do you think of JFK Jr.? I'm not a huge fan of JFK Jr. for several reasons. Mostly has to do with abortion, his stance on abortion. Look, if you're not for the right to life for every human being, no matter what their location is, if you would remove someone's human rights because they happen to be located inside their mother's womb, you're not going to get my support. And we could go on and on about that, but that's not the topic of this live. The tribe of David is the rightful royal, blah, blah, blah. Okay, that's not a question. Question, will they pull all the tourists from Israel before the war starts? I don't think so. DJRIKYYP asked, will they pull all the tourists from Israel before the war starts? I don't think so. Believe it or not, there are a lot of tourists in Israel right now. It's a good time to go to Israel because there's not as many crowds as there normally are. As long as you stay more than 5 kilometers away from the borders, you're not going to get hassled. And if you're concerned about the, rocket launches and things like that, if you stay in, from Tiberias south, you don't have a whole lot to worry about. The Iron Dome system does a very good job protecting Jerusalem, and in reality, the bad guys are likely not going to do a lot of firing rockets and missiles at Jerusalem proper because it holds one of their most sacred sites. Can you imagine the pushback? Do you imagine what would happen to Hezbollah's support if they fired a missile at Jerusalem and accidentally blew up the Dome of the Rock? That might actually happen someday, but they're not going to try to do it. Question, did the Jews create this war for everyone, or is it some other tribe? I'm not sure what you're talking about, LMG Philanthropy. If I didn't know you as a regular, I would take offense at that question, because it sounds like you're asserting that the Israelis created the war that resulted from October 7th. That obviously is untrue. So I'm not sure what you're trying to say there. I don't think that was a well-worded question. Question, Chuck, will the temple ever get bombed or attacked? We just talked about that. Or is it protected? The temple is well protected by the Iron Dome system, but one of the things that we're going to do on our upcoming tour of Israel in October, there's no space left on that tour, by the way. is we're going to talk about the theory that the temple is not actually on the Temple Mount, that to rebuild the Temple of Solomon would not require the destruction of the mosque at Al-Aqsa. Because there are some, I think, very reasonable men who have done some very serious study into this issue and believe that the actual Temple of Solomon was in the city of David, which is next to the old city of Jerusalem, and that the area of the Temple Mount was actually the Roman garrison at that time. And so we're going to explore that concept at length on our tour. And if you want to know more about it, you can go read a book by a friend of mine, Bob Cornuke, that he wrote called Temple. And he explains in there why, the whole theory of why the temple may not have been on the Temple Mount. That's obviously a contentious issue, but I think he makes some very good points in there. Chuck Freeman says, is Israel and Hezbollah inevitability going to happen in your opinion? Well, yeah, I think we answered that. Are there a lot of Christian residents in southern Lebanon? Yes, there are. Dennis, there are a lot of Maronite Christians on both sides of the border, and they are suffering greatly at the hands of Hezbollah even now. Question, if China was smart, wouldn't they provoke USA to defend a third war located area, given U.S. seems to be provoking the game because of the bombs and weapons being handed out? Boy, I wish you'd be a little clearer with your questions, LMG Philanthropy. That again is kind of hard to understand. China certainly is happy to see the United States getting distracted with wars in Ukraine and in Israel, and perhaps another war coming up very soon in our own backyard between Venezuela and Guyana, in order to take our focus off of what China wants to accomplish in the South China Sea and with Taiwan. So I think that answers your question. But all right, that's all I've got for today, folks. I'm going to let you go now. If you have further questions, you can always email me at hotzoneholton@gmail.com. So Danny says, why does the world ignore the alliance of Palestinians and Hitler since 1941? I love it when people ask me questions that would require me to understand people's motivations for things. You can't get inside the minds of evil men. I guess the best answer I can give you is just depravity. Question, is the pool of Siloam something to do with the temple's placement? No, not the pool of Siloam. But again, that's a whole nother topic. Let's talk about that another time. We'll probably get Bob Cornuke on a live and have him explain the theory he has and that other people have about the temple being located somewhere else. It's very interesting. Is it safe to travel to Spain right now? My son is going there next week. Stiv West Stacker, I would tell you Spain is much less safe than most people realize. If your son is going there, he can probably do so, but have him keep a very close eye on his things. There are a tremendous number of African migrants in Spain, and there's a lot of violence and a lot of petty theft. We were robbed in just moments when we were in Barcelona a couple years ago, likely by African migrants. It's basically the idea that California got, this bright idea that if we just don't target criminals, that they'll stop robbing people. Well, that's what Spain tried to do, and the crime in Spain is off the charts. I would go to Spain, but I would be very, very cautious and very aware, very careful. Don't leave anything in your car, and then leave your car unlocked. Maybe leave the windows down with nothing in your car, just so that the guys won't break your windows trying to find out if you've got anything in there. I think my baby Aurora is getting ready to call me, so I'm going to get off and let you guys go. Thank you for watching. Again, please like and share the podcast, and we will see you again tomorrow.